When I think about CatDog, there's a wave of just wonderful childhood memories that come to mind. I watched this show at the peak of my golden childhood years, and I look back at those times just so fondly. This show brings me right back to my early elementary school days, and you know I live for that nostalgia. CatDog was a classic cartoon that took itself seriously in all the right ways. Like, they would have serious plot lines from time to time, but you know they always gotta slip in a little jokey joke here and there. The humor in the show was clever and witty, and of course the art style and color palette is just so perfect for the feel of the show. CatDog would run from April of 1998 through June of 2005 over the span of 4 seasons, the last one being the shortest with a sad 6 episodes total, which would air over the course of 5 years from 2000 all the way to 2005. My real point being, despite the show's long runtime, I feel like CatDog never really got the love that they deserved, especially in the end. In my opinion, they really had what it took to be a strong contender for the main mascot for Nickelodeon. However, when SpongeBob came along a year after they premiered, their chance quickly withered away to nothing. Regardless, CatDog is one of my favorite Nicktoons of all time. Like I said earlier, the show knew when just to take itself seriously, and even when it did, it never took itself all too seriously. The show had a very special way of conveying the depths of a dire situation while also slipping in a hilarious twist just at the right time, and that right there is a huge reason why I love this show. And that's why today on our nostalgic walk down memory lane, we're gonna check out a perfect example of an episode of CatDog that knew just how to perfectly walk that line between taking itself seriously, but not too seriously. But first, I want to thank you so much for clicking on this video and for being a part of my YouTube journey. If you're watching this video, then I'm so happy to have you here, but I want you to know that you're probably missing out right now. You see, at this very moment, over on my Patreon, I just uploaded a brand spanking new Patreon exclusive video about an extremely offensive, messed up, and controversial episode of South Park. And it is chock full of all sorts of colorful language and awful things that I definitely couldn't get away with here on YouTube. It's a video that I had a lot of fun making, and I'm honestly just so excited for the future of my Patreon and my main channel here on YouTube, of course. I recently found myself in a position where I have a lot more time to invest in making content, so I've been going hard with making videos. There's going to be a lot more content coming to this channel as well as my Patreon, so you won't want to miss out. If you aren't subscribed, now's a great time to do that, and if you have the means to give some extra support, the link to my Patreon is down in the description box below. I want to stress, no pressure at all, and there's no obligation. I want you to know that if you can't support me on Patreon, you being here on YouTube is more than enough support. But if you do have the means to show some extra support, it would make my big ol' heart smile a whole bunch. Thank you so much for your time, and let's get right into the video. Oh yeah, also, I know everyone is looking forward to the next Dark Side of Hey Arnold video, and I am as well, and I just want you to know that I'm working on it right now, so look forward to that too. Today we're checking out the Season 2 episode called The End. This episode begins at nighttime in Nürburg. We see CatDog on top of their roof as Cat looks into a telescope at the night sky. Meanwhile, Dog is just going to town on a bucket of peanuts.
Could you stop throwing those peanuts all over the place? I'm trying to admire some heavenly bodies.
Wow! You can see the beach with that thing? Let me look.
Hey, be careful with Winslow's new telescope that I'm using without his permission.
Sorry.
Dog looks into the night sky as he spies stars and clouds, then a large black cloud that looks like a skull. Cat pries the telescope away from Dog and he sees the cloud, and he decides that they need to do a little bit of research.
Quick, we must consult Nostradamus' big book of predictions. Nostradamus made predictions thousands of years ago.
I predict that mountains will fly, trees will speak Japanese, and a cat and dog will be joined as one.
Well, 1 out of every 3 of his predictions came true.
Konnichiwa, CatDog-san.
Cat flips through the book until he reaches section C for cloud. The book says that a black cloud in the shape of a skull with scary teeth means the rain to end all rains. 1 hour after the death cloud is sighted, the sky shall open and the waters of doom shall cover the earth.
Cat, what are we gonna do?
Find a really big umbrella?
No, we gotta warn everybody.
Throw another strike, come on! Put some English on it, learn it at Cliff! You're the best! You're the king! You're the champ! You got the form!
Silence!
CatDog bursts through the door of the bowling alley on their bike as they're launched down the lane that Cliff is attempting to bowl, thus ruining his throw. Cliff's ball ends up flying down the lane and leaves a very convenient perfect 7-10 split, which, if you're not familiar with bowling, is one of the hardest throws to have to make, consisting of the back left and back right pins only, thus making it basically impossible for Cliff to win this tournament. Of course, not completely impossible, but the odds are not exactly in his favor. Cliff picks up CatDog to pound them, and this happens.
The rain to end all rains is a-comin'.
No, really, the end is near.
No, the end is here, at least for yous two. Oh, it's your fault I'm stuck with an impossible 7-10 split.
No, look, we're serious. We saw a sign in the sky.
Dog explains that they looked up what they saw in Nostradamus' book, and it's interpreted to be a harbinger of the end of days. As Shriek walks up to call BS, we see Lube walk up and grab Cliff's bowling ball and start swinging it around like he's gonna bowl for him. Cliff tells him to stop because he's gonna ruin the game, and Lube says that he's just warming the ball up for him. Then, all of a sudden, we see Lube lose control of the ball as he goes flying backwards.
Touchdown!
He picked up the 7-10 split! CatDog's right! It's a sign!
The end is near.
Leaping apocalypse.
I'm too young to die!
Immediately, everyone in the bowling alley starts to panic as mass hysteria breaks out. People are running into each other, Lube is banging his head on a pole, and of all people, Cat is the one remaining calm. He walks up to Lube and tells him not to panic, and Cliff explains that he's not panicking, he just does that every Wednesday night. Meanwhile, Dog just makes things worse by saying that they only have 45 minutes to live after looking at his watch. Cat says that he has a plan and that they're gonna have to work together, but it might just be crazy enough to work. We cut right on over to CatDog's house.
All right, Dog, now me and you.
As everyone works together to finish CatDog's arc, the rain begins to slowly fall and the panic begins to set in. Cat tells everyone to keep working as they power through, and next thing you know, the arc is finished with no time to spare.
Cat was right! 3 cheers for Cat!
Stop! We only have time for one cheer, but thanks for the thought. Behold our ark. Fellow Nürburgians, we're saved!
We're doomed!
As everyone sits sadly on the cliffside overlooking Nürburg, they all take a heartfelt moment with each other. Except for Cat, who's just kind of a jerk. With tears in his eyes, he tells Dog that he wishes Winslow was there. Dog asks if it's because he misses him, and Cat says no, it's just because he wishes that he could watch him drown like a rat. Everyone else is rather wholesome, though.
Remember when your bike got busted and you didn't know who did it? It was me. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Remember when I said I lost your baseball glove? I ate it.
I got to tell you something, Lube. My real name ain't Cliff. It's Clifford.
My real name isn't Lube. It's...
Ignatius?
After that, we see Shriek approach Dog very shyly, seeming like she has something to tell him.
We ain't got much time, so, kinda,
Shriek starts to walk away blissfully, but much to her dismay, Cat stops her. He more or less replicates exactly what she did to Dog, but as soon as he finishes planting one on her, she slaps the life out of him. After that, we see CatDog's house in smoldering ashes and rubble, while the sky pours rain amidst the crashes of thunder and flashes of lightning. We then hear a honking noise as headlights appear down the road, approaching the pile of rubble that used to be CatDog's home.
Hey, what's the ruckus?
Cat's on the end of the world through your telescope.
I told you to stay away from that thing!
Winslow, we've only got 5 seconds left.
Let me see. Yikes! It's worse than I thought!
What could be worse than the end of the world?
This peanut shell almost scratched my telescope!
3, 2, 1, 0.
As the sand in the timer runs out and the end of the world is supposed to come, nothing happens. Right about this point, Randolph takes a second to backtrack and he asks about the peanut Winslow was talking about.
Here's your end of the world!
No waters of doom.
As everyone realizes that the world isn't ending, CatDog takes a big sigh of relief. Meanwhile, instead of celebrating, everyone else decides to go for each other's throats immediately.
So you broke my bike, you big liar!
Cough up the glove, pig!
Ignatius! Ignatius! Love's name is Ignatius!
Love's name is Ignatius. Love's name is, hey, I'm doing something wrong. Hey,
While that's happening, we see Shriek approach Dog and threaten to pound him from here to tomorrow if he says anything. Then, as you would expect, she sets her sights on Cat, attacking him for what he did to her. Full-blown chaos erupts as we see the 3 different fights happening all at once, until this happens.
Cat!
What?
Did Nostradamus say anything about a giant cloud shaped like an elephant riding a unicycle?
This episode was wild, and I'm so excited to tear into this one. In the beginning, of course, CatDog are on the roof as Cat is using Winslow's telescope without his permission. Cat sees this cloud and he ends up taking it as an omen. This part is really interesting to me because given the way that they portrayed this artistically, I would have thought the same thing. In the end, we learn that all of this is a misunderstanding that was caused by a peanut shell in the lens, but when we see Cat panning over with the telescope, the cloud isn't moving with the telescope. It's as if the cloud is in its own spot while Cat moves the telescope over to see it. If this was caused by a peanut shell in the lens, it wouldn't have looked like that. It would have stayed in the same spot because it isn't a cloud formation, it's literally a piece of scrap that's like against the lens. Now, first I saw this and thought that maybe they just animated it like that so that they could get their point across and portray it to more accurately represent what Cat thought he was seeing. However, the ending of this episode has me completely rethinking that. When the episode comes to an end and we see that unicycling elephant appear in the sky, then it turns into Nostradamus' head, that had me rethinking everything we had just seen. What if the skull cloud really was there? I mean, the one Cat saw was literally identical to the one seen in Nostradamus' book, so by all means, it very well could have been real. However, the only way to justify that would be if Nostradamus really exists in the clouds and is like playing a trick on Cat or something, but even I could admit that's a massive stretch. It's just a really odd coincidence, that's all I'm saying. Now, the Nostradamus reference is one that I thoroughly love because, like, you know for a fact that most kids are seeing this and they're gonna have no idea what this is even referencing. If you're not familiar, the character of Nostradamus is based off of, and I imagine a jab at, Nostradamus. He was a French astrologer, apothecary, physician, and a reputed seer who lived in the 1500s. He is very well known for writing a book of prophecies in the form of 942 poems, more or less, that allegedly predicted future events. Now, I'm not gonna lie to you guys, it's almost 3 a.m. right now, and I'm not sure if my brain is ready to fall too far down the Nostradamus rabbit hole, but I did do a little bit of research on him, and boy am I struggling not to fall down the rabbit hole right now. The writings of Nostradamus are all very cryptic and symbolic, and very much so open to interpretation. Many experts argue that his predictions are largely the product of creative interpretation of these poems, and that they aren't really accurate. Nostradamus himself even stated that his predictions shouldn't be taken literally, and that they are written symbolically. However, if you dig further into his writings, the lines start to get blurry at a few points. I stumbled upon a ton of accounts online of Nostradamus' predictions that came true, some that have evidence and some that really don't. Some people claim that he predicted his own death and that his body would be stolen, and that actually ended up coming true, but I couldn't find any actual evidence of that one. The story goes that he told his secretary, "Tomorrow at sunrise I shall no longer be here." Then the next day he was found dead on the floor in his room. However, he did have arthritis and gout, which would later progress to edema and would ultimately lead to congestive heart failure. Now, either he predicted his own death, or his understanding of the human body had him convinced that he was dying, which could have definitely been the case. Other than that though, there are some of his writings of his that you can easily find and read for yourself online that could potentially be perceived as predicting many notable events, such as the French Revolution, World War II, the atom bomb, 9/11, the first moon landing, and the rise of Hitler. Some people even went as far as pointing out his use of the word hister and claiming it to be a typo of Hitler's name. However, hister was actually another name for the Danube River, which is apparently what he was referencing to when using that word. What's really interesting too is learning about how Nostradamus allegedly predicted these things according to different sources. Apparently, he would use scrying to see the future, which would involve him staring into a bowl of water while focusing in a trance-like state. It's also been reported that much of his prophetic work paraphrases ancient end-of-the-world prophecies that are of biblical nature, which he then supplemented with references to historical events and projected those into the future with the aid of astrology and the alignment of the planets when those events actually happened. More or less, he was the CEO of horoscopes in the 1500s. Regardless, I'll admit that was probably way too much to info dump on you guys, just to make a simple point that in this show they call him Nostradamus, likely as a jab of the fact that this guy pulled all the shit out of his ass and is credited with predicting the future. I mean, to be fair, he did predict battles in the clouds and frogs falling from the sky. As far as this episode goes, I love the fact that Cat has a copy of Nostradamus' big book of predictions just laying around and he takes it as law. Like, they were so fully convinced that the world was gonna end that they were in all seriousness fearing for their lives. CatDog was so panicked about the world ending that they immediately went to town to warn the others. This was just a great example of how quickly fear can be spread and how hysteria can virally spread unwarranted fear completely based off of speculation. Case in point, CatDog walks right into the bowling alley saying that the world was ending and that the rain to end all rains was coming, and no one believed them. Then, with that little seed planted in their brains, all it took was Lube landing the 7-10 split to have everyone immediately convinced that the end of times is coming. I just love the symbolism here. In this day and age, I feel like there's many different real-life applications that this analogy can be applied to, and God, I just love it. Literally, all it takes is one person telling someone that it's happening, and next thing you know, the whole world is freaking out. The first example to come to mind is that whole clown debacle back in 2016. Literally, there was one report of an evil clown sighting, which was actually a marketing stunt for a horror short film called Gags. The phenomenon quickly spread to many other cities across the US, and rapidly after that, it had spread to many other countries as well. Of course, there was no actual evil clowns going about and doing anything, but the entire world was in a panic with a fear of clowns showing up in wooded areas or vacant parking lots because of these videos going viral online. Honestly, I love how great of a job this episode did of portraying mass hysteria and how misinformation can spread fear like a rapid growing wildfire. Moving on from there though, we certainly have to address the biblical tones in this episode. Right out the gate, the first religious reference we see came in the beginning when Cat said that he's admiring heavenly bodies as he gazes through the telescope. Then of course Dog coming in with his cheeky comment about being able to see the beach from there. I love the juxtaposition there of throwing in a religious reference and an innuendo in the same breath, killing two birds with one stone in the most hilarious way. After that, when we see Cat referencing the Big Book of Predictions, Nostradamus' prediction was that the coming of this cloud signifies the rain to end all rains, which would be a reference to the Bible, and from what little research I did about the Bible, specifically the book of Genesis, featuring the rain that would allegedly last 40 days and 40 nights. Not gonna lie, I'm not about to dive into Bible lore, but to give you the Cliff Notes version, the rain is coming to flood the earth, and Noah builds an ark to take 2 of each animal onto the ark to survive the extreme rain and repopulate after the rain and flooding is over. At least that's how I think it goes, again operating on very little Bible knowledge over here. Now, in this episode, we see Cat more or less adopt the role of Noah as he spearheads the plan to turn their entire house into an ark so that they can survive the rain to end all rains. Now, of course, this is just ridiculous. There's no way that this would really work. The way that houses are constructed, there's just way too many points where water would enter through the structure, especially CatDog's house. I highly doubt that the architect that designed this thing made it to be completely airtight. The only way I could see this working is if Cat had like a really big can of Flex Seal or something like that. Remember that commercial where that guy turns a screen door into a boat with Flex Seal? I mean, hear me out, okay? If they had completely covered the entire house in Flex Seal and then they knock it down onto its side so that they could cover the bottom in Flex Seal too, then it actually may have had a chance of working as long as the cracks in the house aren't too massive. I love how this portion about Bible references quickly turned into an ad for Flex Seal. They are not a sponsor, I swear, I just think it's kinda cool. Now, I will say this much, with cartoon logic being cartoon logic, I'd imagine right about this point right here, Flex Seal aside, they were probably good to go. Then, out of nowhere, the ark, which keep in mind is also CatDog's house, gets struck by lightning and burns to a pile of ash and rubble. Now, the possible implications around this one are certainly open to interpretation, but I saw it a few different ways myself. First of all, regardless of how you interpret that lightning strike, given all the biblical references and implications in this episode, I'm fully convinced that they are hinting at this being an act of God. Clearly, God is pissed at Cat. My thought was that God could be potentially mad at Cat for more or less pretending to be a prophet. Again, I'm not too versed in any of this religious stuff, but according to a quick Google search, Noah served as one of God's prophets. Now, Cat wasn't literally dressing in like old-timey religious-looking garb and pretending to be a prophet or anything like that, but spearheading the act of building this ark because of a prophecy that you think you've stumbled upon is more or less mimicking the acts of Noah, who, again, is apparently a prophet. So that could have potentially angered God and caused him to smite the ark. God could also be angry because Cat thinks he knows what he's talking about when he doesn't, and he's falsely leading people. He directed the building of this ark by a group of townspeople because he was taking a poem that is loose and open to interpretation to heart. By all means, the rain to end all rains is a very subjective term. Maybe Nostradamus was just good at predicting the weather patterns and he was using that term to describe that the rain was going to be a lot worse than normal for a really long time. Or maybe Nostradamus didn't mean normal rain. Maybe Cat's interpretation is completely wrong, and when he said the rain to end all rains, he actually meant something crazy would happen, like the skies rained fire and the seas turned red with blood. In that case, Cat would be falsely leading people to their death because there's no way that even his Flex Seal covered house could survive that. I mean, if we really take it literally, it was described as the rain to end all rains, meaning that after this rain happens, there will never be another rain again, which in turn sounds like the end of the world. So with that direct interpretation, because keep in mind Cat's taking all this literally, I can't help but wonder what his plan was to survive that. Like, say if the whole world did flood indefinitely, what would they do? Let's pretend for a sec that Cat's plan worked and it really was just an indefinite flood that they were floating through. At some point they would likely run out of food in CatDog's kitchen and everyone is gonna starve or start eating each other. If you look at it that way, surviving the flood might be even worse than perishing in it, as morbid as that sounds. Regardless though, my whole point encompassing all this is that Cat really has no idea what he's doing. Now, circling back to the lightning strike, another way that we could interpret this is fate. It could potentially not be a religious thing at all. It could be the universe saying that it wasn't going to allow Cat the glory of being the hero in this situation. You gotta keep in mind that throughout this series, we've seen Cat do some pretty despicable, mean, and very selfish things. It could be gathered that if karma is real, then Cat's is probably pretty bad. With that being said though, it would make sense that when he finally gets the chance to potentially be a hero and save everyone, fate would strike him down and say, nope, you don't get that glory because you've been a little stinker. Who knows? I, for one, am a big believer in the fact that everything happens for a reason and that you get back what you put out into the universe. Cat has put some pretty negative energy into the universe, so maybe this was the universe finally capitalizing on its opportunity to give that negative energy back. Even if this isn't really the end of the world and Cat wouldn't have saved anyone if the house wasn't struck by lightning. To kind of come full circle with all of this, I definitely have to compare the predictions of Nostradamus to what we've learned about how Nostradamus went about making his predictions. I do want to preface this by making it clear that I'm of the stance that Nostradamus from CatDog pulled all of his predictions out of his and made all this up. I personally don't think that there was any actual effort or research done in writing his big book of predictions. More or less, his prediction was that when you see the cloud, it would bring the rain to end all rains. When we compare that to how Nostradamus allegedly made his predictions, it could be gathered that Nostradamus could have potentially taken the story of Noah's Ark from the Bible and used his knowledge of astrology, combined with the proposed timeline of when the story of Noah's Ark took place, to pinpoint the potential planetary alignment at the time that the rain had happened, and use that predict when it would happen again. But what's weird is that he didn't actually predict when. It wasn't a timeline based on repeating planetary alignments and the fear that history would repeat itself based on that alignment. It was straight up just him being like, yep, watch out for this weird looking cloud, and when you see that cloud, it's gonna rain a whole bunch. And of course, by that logic, no when you see a big dark cloud, odds are that, yeah, there's gonna be some rain coming. That's usually how it goes. So again, just saying, I'm pretty sure that Nostradamus is a hack that pulled all this out of thin air. Now, moving on from there, I want to point out a few things that go in a different direction from prophecies and biblical references. I definitely have to point out that the timeline of this episode is completely screwy. While they are all in the bowling alley, Dog points out that they only have about 45 minutes until the rain to end all rain comes. So you're telling me that all within 45 minutes, CatDog and all the townspeople made it from the bowling alley in town all the way to CatDog's house, which, mind you, is pretty far out of town and up on top of a cliff that overlooks the town. Then they literally knocked down CatDog's house and did all this work on it to turn it into an ark, and it got struck by lightning and completely burned to ash and rubble. And on top of all that, they still had time to profess their deepest, darkest secrets to each other. Honestly, you gotta admit, the timeline here really doesn't make sense. There's no way that they could have done all this in 45 minutes, and in all honesty, they didn't really need to. There's not really a benefit to putting a 45-minute time limit on this from a storytelling standpoint. Like, sure, it's a time crunch, but setting a 2-hour countdown to the end of the world isn't that large of a difference from 45 minutes in the grand scheme of things when we're talking about the literal world ending. At least it would have been a tiny bit more believable if the show's writers made that timeline longer than 45 minutes, but it is what it is, I guess. Not really that big of a deal, but from a continuity standpoint, that timeline just isn't all too believable. On another light-hearted note, I just have to address Mervis's confession. Dunlap admits that he was the one who broke Mervis's bike and then lied about it, to which Mervis responds by admitting that he ate Dunlap's baseball glove. Now, the bike I can rationalize. That's your best friend, and you're afraid of hurting his feelings because you care about him, and you don't want to make him hate you. Lying is still a really freaking lame thing to do, but at least I can see where Dunlap is coming from. Mervis, on the other hand, what would compel him to eat Dunlap's baseball glove? I mean, I guess it's made of cowhide, and pigs are omnivores, so they will eat meat, but that's not meat? That's processed cowhide. I don't know, that was just weird, and it made me wonder if Mervis had that thing where you're compelled to eat random stuff that isn't edible, like on that show My Strange Addiction. God, I would love to talk about that show on my channel someday. That sounds like fun. The last thing that I have to touch on is that part when they're all confessing their secrets to each other. We see Shriek approach Dog very timidly, quietly, and sweetly in what was almost a really touching and tender moment. Then she goes from 0 to 10 and full-blown eats his face without his consent, and after that we see him pass out from it. This had me just a tiny bit confused here. Did he pass out because he liked it, or was it the pure shock of the whole situation that made him pass out? Regardless, we end up following that setup with Cat, who approaches Shriek very awkwardly and literally mimics her actions down to a T, and he ends up getting the crap slapped out of him as a result. This whole sequence was just so cringe, and I'm having a hard time deciding whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. I will say this much, I feel like it was a bit of a missed opportunity with Shriek and Dog. Not in the sense of because they could have been a thing, but more along the lines of that this was their chance to portray a really cute and sweet moment that the show has never really had before. But instead, they went in kind of a weird direction with it. But hey, like I said, the show really had its way of taking itself seriously, but not too seriously. If they really had made that a sweet moment from start to finish, it would have been far too different from their norm and would have probably seemed out of place in this show. However, them teasing a really sweet and tender moment then turning it into something wacky like they did definitely makes sense and is exactly what you'd expect from CatDog. All in all, I can say that this episode really did feel different than the rest of the series. They would tackle morbid topics on the show for sure, but this episode really had a dark and morbid vibe from start to finish, which was really unlike every other episode of the show. I can appreciate that for sure, and this is definitely an episode of CatDog that I enjoy. Of course, it got cringe for a bit, but the lore behind it with Nostradamus was really intriguing to me as a kid, and it still is as an adult. I'm fascinated by mysticism, and the idea of someone accurately predicting the future is definitely a topic that seems to always catch my attention personally. But what do you think? Did you guys enjoy this episode? Let me know in the comments down below. I always love seeing your guys' feedback. If you enjoyed this video, then maybe share it with a friend and give some praise to the YouTube algorithm in hopes that it pushes this video to everyone else. And I bet you thought I forgot, didn't you? Come on, I could never forget. I gotta share some love to my true 90s kids over on Patreon. You guys are the literal best, and every time I get to type your names into the end of the video, I do it with a huge smile on my face because your guys' support means the world to me. Again, link to Patreon is down in the description box below if you'd like your name to be in this list as well, and as always, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.